Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I will start out the video. I probably will have mispronounced that name and will be mispronouncing names throughout the video, so I apologize for that, but I believe it's pronounced Haruki Murakami. And I will talk about the author's background, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Haruki Murakami is a very well-known Japanese author. He's been writing for almost 40 years. He sold millions of copies. Probably still his most famous book is Kafka at the Shore. I've never read any of his other stuff. This is the first novel of his that I have read. This came out in 2009-2010 Japan and was translated into English in 2011. And it's a little bit of a difficult book to summarize, but I'll try here. The book essentially is the story of two people. One of them is a what's known as a cram school instructor. He's a math teacher in the Tokyo area in 1984, and he gets involved in a conspiracy to rewrite the novel of a child prodigy. And the other story that eventually interweaves with his story is a story of a female assassin who kills men who have abused women. And the book takes tons of different twists and turns and has a lot of supernatural elements to it. But the main two characters, those are the two stories that eventually interweave. So the one thing I can say for the book that I did enjoy, if you read a lot or just read at all or watch movies, you tend to see things that are recycled often in culture, the same stories that are told again and again and again. I will say for 1Q84, this is a book that I've never seen before in any way. There's a lot of different, it eventually boils down to being a love story, but there's a lot of just strange elements that the author throws in that I haven't seen replicated anywhere else. I don't think it's something that's trying to be anything else. I think it's trying to be its own thing, and it's very much its own creature, which I appreciated. I also thought that there were a couple characters in the book who were interesting. I didn't particularly care for the main characters as much, but there was a few side characters. One in particular who comes in as a viewpoint character about, I don't know, 3/4 of the way, 2/3 of the way through the book. I really enjoyed that character for the time that he was in the book. I wish in some ways he was able to come in a little bit earlier and we had spent more time with him. But I thought that character was someone that I enjoyed following. On the downside, so I don't know if it came through when I showed the cover, but this is a very, very long book. It's about 1,157 pages, I think my copy was. And it's very slow moving. The plot doesn't really start to show itself for about 250 pages or so into the book. You start to get the sense of the plot. As much strange, unique things that are going on, I don't think Murakami is really interested in explaining anything to you in detail. By that I mean there does feel like there's a lot of elements that are just strange for the sake of being strange, and the rules of the world are not really nailed down in a way that make the book feel grounded, or at least it didn't feel grounded to me to where I really understood the stakes of things necessarily. And it's a lot of strange for being sake of feeling strange. I thought that this is the only book that I can remember reviewing for the channel where in the middle of reading it, I looked up whether or not the author was a planner or a pantser, to use the common terminology. I think going back to my book on the review of Writing Out Without Rules for Jeff Somers, I think those were his terms, whether or not an author outlines major plot points, knows where they're going before they start writing, or if they just kind of start writing with some ideas in mind but no real roadmap from beginning to end. Murakami, I guess famously, I didn't know this before reading the book, but is a pantser. And I definitely felt that going through the novel. There feels like there were paragraphs that were inserted on a second or third draft where he had to go back and say, oh, well, this is why this happened, or this is why that happened. And if your characters are following the logic of the characters, the feelings, and the thought process, you don't really have to do that. And that came out pretty strongly while reading it. I felt those things kind of stuck out like sore thumbs. There are characters that kind of just fall off in the middle of the book. You don't hear from them again. They kind of leave the book with a little bit of a shrug, and you're like, I don't understand what happened there. There are some things that may just be cultural differences. There's some metaphors and similes that didn't quite translate well into English. There's also certain, I don't know if it's stylistic choice or if it's more common to Japanese literature, but there are characters who went unnamed for large portions of the book and then are suddenly named. And that makes sense in like a mystery story, or there's some reason for keeping their characters unnamed. But in this sense, there's a character that has that happen to her, and there's no quite reason why he does that. Again, I'll chalk that up to kind of maybe a cultural difference. That may just be something I don't understand. And then finally, the last point of it, I would say, the book, like I said, was quite long. There seems, to me at least, there was a clear ending point in the book where he could have ended the book, and he goes about 30 pages beyond that ending point. So just in general, I felt that the book was overly long and overly concerned with the characters' thoughts, where it was just the repetitive nature of these thoughts where they repeat the same thing over and over again or rephrase things to mean the same thing. And again, some of that may be a cultural difference, but as someone who is reading it in English, it felt like I was having to trek through a jungle to get to interesting things. There is, I will say, for people, as far as who I would recommend the book to, I think there are a ton of different readers who read for different reasons. This book reminded me in some ways of a David Lynch or a Donnie Darko is probably the one thing I can point to and say there's a little bit of similarities there, though I think that the equivalent of this would be if Donnie Darko had been 7 hours long. But there are similarities in the plot there, and I think that if you're someone who is interested in ideas and not so interested as far as realistic characters or a plot making literal sense, if you're just kind of reading because you enjoy weird things happening or just weird elements, I think you would enjoy this. Like I said, it's not really like anything I've ever read that I can compare it to. I was going to do a spoiler video of it, but I just didn't feel strongly enough about it to want to do the spoiler video. But those were my thoughts on it. I think that for me, I didn't care for it as much. I wish it had been much shorter. I think it could have been pared down quite a bit. I think the pantsing style comes through where you have things that someone had plotted this novel A to B to C to D. They wouldn't have included certain scenes. There's certain scenes that feel expanded unnecessarily, and there are other scenes where, to go back to the show don't tell, there are things where that happen off screen that probably could have happened on screen. So I had a lot of I bounced off it pretty hard, and I had a lot of problems with it. I will say too, as far as elements that may be troublesome to people, there's a brief torture scene in the book. There is a child who's a victim of sexual assault. That sexual assault happens off screen, but she's a victim of that. There's several different hangings. There's a strange undercurrent of women who are abused by their husbands or either killed by lovers or boyfriends, or who commit suicide. That happens several times in the book. There is a religious cult in the book. There's two actually different sects of a religious cult in the book. So it's just overall for me, again, as reading it as a Western audience, there are a lot of things, a lot of parts to it that don't ever really connect into a whole cohesive narrative. But again, if you're someone who reads really because you want to have an experience that you can't get anywhere else, this actually would be an interesting book, because I don't think you could replicate it very easily on film in a mini-series or anything like that, really partly because of its length, but also partly because of the feeling that I think you get from reading it. So that's 1Q84 by, again, Haruki Murakami. Next time I'm going to be finishing up State of Wonder by Ann Patchett. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll leave my Twitter link below. I'll also leave the link to the Jeff Somers video, so you can kind of check that out if you're not sure what I was talking about before with pantsing versus plotting. Until next time, bye.